Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Today, we are going to talk about a silent engine that turns raw models into real world intelligence. I'm talking about AI inference. And I'm speaking today with Dion Harris, who is NVIDIA's head of data center product marketing. So basically, a leader who is shaping how inference transforms industries, scales intelligence, and builds the next generation of AI factories. So what we are going to talk about is how inference creates measurable business value, not just hype, why cost, speed, and energy are becoming the new battleground of AI, and how NVIDIA is designing the digital factories that will literally produce intelligence. How are you, Dion? Great to have you.
I'm doing great, Pascal. Thanks for having me.
So, Dion, how has NVIDIA's approach to AI inference translated into measurable business value for your customers? And maybe let's start with what is AI inference so that we are all aligned on the topic.
Yeah, that's a great question. We always like to level set because we throw these terms around like they're commonly understood. But basically, everyone understands what AI is. And you may have heard of models like ChatGPT, or you may have heard of Anthropic's Claude model. And so essentially, those are large foundational models. And basically, you go what's called training. It's think of like when you're going to college to learn how to be, an engineer. You basically go into college, and that's the learning phase. And so for a foundational model, that's what training is. And then let's say you graduate from college and you start, trying to figure out what you want to do. You start applying for different jobs, you get an actual profession, and that's really where you start applying your learnings. And that is actual inference. So when you think about inference and what it means for AI, it's really when and how we're extracting value out of it, out of those foundational models that have been developed to then create intelligence. And therefore, once you apply it using inference, you build value.
I love it. So, I mean, it's very simple, very clear. So thank you very much. The
Okay.
the how how does AI inference translate into business impact?
Yeah. So, like I said, I think given where we are in terms of the evolution of AI, like I said, ChatGPT had its big bang, I would say, in 2022 of November. That's when folks really got a glimpse and an understanding for how much value and how much usefulness could be derived out of some of these AI models. But since then, it has changed, dramatically. We've introduced new capabilities like reasoning, where AI has ability to do inferencing, but iterate lots of different times to validate and to improve its answer. And so, given sort of how the AI models have advanced, it's now created a whole new level of utility and value for a lot of end users who are trying to deploy and leverage AI, either it's whether it's an enterprise, whether it's a government lab who's trying to use it to advance science, or it might be even a new type of business model that's really being built AI first, like a Chat GPT or an OpenAI like company. So it's really starting to open up all these different opportunities to leverage AI to drive real business value.
Excellent. So it can be a bank that is managing KYC, know your customer for
Absolutely.
using AI, and each new customer that comes in is a new inference on this model, and this is where you have a role to play with the platform that you've built. Uh,
And that's like, and
so
that's sort of the virtual AI perspective. But then there's also physical AI in terms of autonomous systems and machines, where you're
yes.
basically taking AI and you're embodying it and introducing it into the physical world. And that's where autonomous driving, where
Mhm.
you're using, autonomous warehouse manufacturing logistics robots. And so all of those elements of AI coming together with the physical environment is also another area where you're seeing AI being applied that drives incredible value for lots of businesses and organizations.
I love it. That's very clear. Um, what makes an inference platform good or bad? What should businesses look for in such a platform?
That's a good question because oftentimes when people talk about inference, unlike training is a pretty straightforward workload. You basically want to say, okay, how can I get the largest cluster I can, make sure my model converges, and drive down the time to train? So fairly straightforward to understand if you have a successful platform. It's just how quickly can you train your model? With inference, it's a little bit different because you have a lot more levers that you need to really think about when you're trying to optimize your platform. And so I'll try to describe that at a high level. So, first, you need to understand again, how well does a platform scale to deliver inference workloads? Because when you're starting to deliver millions and trillions of tokens, meaning you're serving lots of end users, and you're generating lots of inferences, you need to figure out how can you do that as efficiently as possible across the entire data center. So we talk a lot about the ability to scale up and scale out, which is basically just another way of saying, how do you build the right infrastructure for the right job? So making sure that you have the flexibility to run the workload across a single server or multiple servers. The other key thing that's really important is understanding the multimodality of AI. AI is not just chatbots, it's also image classification, there's diffusion models, there's video generation models. And so understanding that AI is not one thing. So you want to have a platform that's fungible and that's ubiquitous enough to not just do well on one type of AI, but has enough utility to drive value across a wide range of use cases because you don't know exactly what you're going to be deploying in terms of AI until you see how it fits your business processes and how your users actually respond to it. So, like I said, being able to scale and then also working with the multimodality aspect of AI. The other key point is ROI. I mean, we're talking about, business value, and the key thing is can your platform deliver both the user experience and the throughput? Can it support enough users that creates a economically viable platform? And once you've been able to do that, then you understand, the importance of both the architecture, meaning like you have a solution that can meet all those requirements, that has a mature software and ecosystem that your developers and users can, basically program to and use. And that all sort of contributes to what we call sort of a really smart inference platform. And so I described that hopefully at a high level, but there's a lot of layers beneath that that make it very hard to implement. And that's really why inference is such an exciting place to really focus and drive value.
And as you said, it's driving value, but it's also driving innovation.
Yeah.
Can you tell us what are the innovations that are impacting enterprises, users, but also, I think, society as a whole?
Absolutely. That's a great question because I think one of the biggest misconceptions about AI is that essentially it's only chatbots. And again, there's tons of value that's being, derived from large language models in terms of, using it to do advanced research, using it to unlock new approaches and business models that drive efficiency within organizations. But one of the things I'm most excited about is some of the work I see happening in scientific computing where they're applying AI to tackle some of the major challenges of science. And so I'll just throw out a couple. One is understanding the climate and weather. It's really important to understand the climate and weather in terms of, not just understanding it for the sake of predicting, whether I should wear a sweater tomorrow, but when you think about all the impacts that it has, whether it's shipping and logistics, transportation, agriculture, disaster recovery. And so all of the sophisticated modeling that goes into understanding the climate and weather runs today on large supercomputers, right, that exist all throughout the world. But
Mhm.
AI is actually introducing new AI surrogate approaches or new AI models that can predict, a lot of these weather and climate phenomena much faster. And as a result, you can actually get a much more accurate representation of what the outcomes will be, especially for extreme outcomes. And this is hugely impactful, like I said, when you're trying to plan, for different extreme events that could happen. For example, there was a large language, I'm sorry, there was a weather model that was able to use, it was a model we had called ForecastNet, that we were able to do what's called a large ensemble forecast that was able to predict the heat wave that happened in North Africa weeks before our traditional methods identified it. And the reason why that's important because early detection means that you can give earlier notification and then make more preparations to potentially save lives or evacuate folks who would be at high risk. So that's just one example where AI could have tremendous value and impact on society as a whole. Another area that I'll just highlight is drug discovery. Matter of fact, I think last week there was a breakthrough by one of the DeepMind models that identified a novel methodology to use an existing drug to basically identify and turn on your immune system to fight cancer cells or fight cancerous bodies in your immune system. And so this is an opportunity. This is an example where it basically did a deep research project. It surveyed all the different compounds and proteins that existed. It looked at all the various solutions, what were the side effects, and then it said, given this vast, sort of amount of data, AI is very incredibly talented at sifting through that data and identifying patterns and novel, sort of novel correlations. And
Mhm.
through that, it was able to identify a compound that could actually help address and identify cancer cells within your body. So this is an area where, like I said, you're going to see incredible breakthroughs, and we're already starting to see them happen right here and now.
That's very meaningful, and you're really lucky to be working in such I mean, you have the power to impact how
Sorry.
our world and how yeah and saving lives and making our worlds a better planet and so on. That's amazing. And now back to Earth, back to the companies that we see and the businesses and the startups and that are around us. And you watching us, most of you are C-levels and VPs in companies. Uh, what are some customer success stories that you've lived and that yeah give us an example, an illustration of how businesses can apply and get benefits from
Yeah.
inference?
That's a good question. So I think businesses are really at the point where they're now deploying AI at scale and leveraging it in their daily operations to drive value. I think a couple of examples that I'll highlight, which are kind of obvious, and then some that are less obvious. First is when you look at companies like Meta or Netflix or any sort of operation where you're doing a recommender and you're trying to pair lots of users with lots of different options, whether it be drivers, whether it be movies. And so AI is incredibly powerful at building recommendation engines that really help tailor, all those various options to a very specific user. And so whenever you have those sorts of dynamics, AI is incredibly useful. And so there's been lots of documented results highlighting how just improving conversion rates by, single percentage digit points translates into billions of dollars. And so when you look at a lot of the online shopping, especially folks like Amazon, you look at, whether it's ad serving, has incredibly direct value in terms of business value and financial outcomes. Another example is Uber. Uber is another entity that when you think about them, like, of course, they're fairly pervasive and they've revolutionized personal transportation. But in terms of them being able to service their 180 million monthly users, they have to do that very efficiently. So if you have to have a person responding and engaging with 180 million users, you're going to quickly, run into a lot of unsatisfied customers. So they've actually created their own model where they can build sort of an interactive chatbot, if you will, with their users and drivers. And they've done it very intelligently to basically make sure that when they deployed the solution, it would, one, adhere to all of their policies, their regulations, their brand guidelines. But then two, it would also be able to create a very natural and engaging, user experience. And because at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you can deliver a solution that's going to add value. The other thing that I thought that was extremely smart, they actually created an AI to measure the AI. So in other
Mm.
words, they created an AI that created an automated customer satisfaction score. So imagine you're engaging with this AI chatbot and you're describing, your service. And you might say, okay, my driver didn't show up. I want a credit back. And they go back and they give them the credit. The AI is also looking at the sentiment of the interaction. They're looking at how quickly it was resolved. So they can actually give a very accurate prediction on what your customer satisfaction is going to be like, not just across a handful of interactions, but across the entire, sort of user base. And so having that much visibility and granularity and understanding of how well you're servicing your customers is incredibly valuable. So that those are just a couple examples, like I said, that I can highlight, but lots of
Yes,
examples are making themselves available every day.
thank you, Dion. That's very concrete, and I can really see how we can benefit as a business from that. So being able to deliver more intelligence out of always more data, creating always more insights from that, always faster.
Yes.
And the outcome of all this is customer satisfaction, is new services that beats competition,
Yes,
yeah, differentiation and optimization, productivity to the highest level.
exactly.
I read about you and I heard about the term AI factory.
Mm,
Can you help me understand what it is and how does it relate to inference and how can it be beneficial for businesses?
that's a good question because we use the term AI factory, and we get this question sometimes, but I think it's really a framework to think about what is happening in terms of this AI movement. So much like when, the Industrial Revolution happened and you had car factories. And as you were starting to build these factories, you would build out the infrastructure, you'd build out, your overall organizational requirements, and then you were going to say we're going to produce cars. And that was a car
Mm,
factory. Today, people are harnessing, power and electricity, and they're building out infrastructure, and they're producing tokens. And what a token is, think of it whenever you enter a prompt, and your AI produces something for you, whether it's an essay, whether it's a DNA sequence, whether it's a weather forecast. It basically does it in the units of tokens. And so, because you're building a solution or a factory that is producing intelligence in the form of tokens, that is what we call an AI factory. Something that a data center that has been purpose built and architected from, the infrastructure, the compute, the networking, all of the supporting infrastructure, the cooling, the networking, et cetera, to deliver the best possible experience for producing tokens. And so that's really how we describe an AI factory. And it actually represents a couple of key things. One, it represents sort of a mental shift because data centers in the past were really about, cost centers. They were really meant to, produce incremental efficiencies improvements, but not really transforming your business completely. And so AI factors, we believe, represents a mental shift in understanding that one, it's a revenue generating center now. The more tokens you can produce, the more it translates directly into revenue that impacts your bottom line, not just, sort of a operational tool. And
mm.
with that mind shift comes, again, new opportunities to go and leverage it and find new business models that support that. But I think as an AI factory, it's really incredible to see how our platform, when we build it, when we work with our partners in the ecosystem, it's really about creating the most efficient AI factory as possible. Because when you understand how you want to drive revenue is through throughput and through creating tokens. And that equation is really how we try to create value for our customers and partners.
If I'm a very blunt question,
Yeah.
if I'm a CEO of a company, and am I right to ask myself the question, should I build an AI factory for my company, or is it another kill?
Well, like I said, given where we are, like I said, I think there's been a couple of, major technology shifts, throughout history. I mean, there was obviously the invention of electricity and sort of what that did for entire industries, and everyone had to figure out how and where they would leverage electricity within their business, but everyone did eventually.
Mm,
You could argue the Industrial Revolution also had similar impacts when you started doing mass production, and every company and business had to figure out where they fit in that new industrial model, the digital age and internet, and how that impacted every business, right? A lot of what we're doing today wouldn't exist before the internet. It created whole new business models and opportunities to leverage these technologies. And so I
yes.
think AI is a similar horizontal transformational technology, and that it will, impact and transform every industry, every vertical. And so it's really just a matter of those companies, those CEOs figuring out how and where. But I do think you have to be smart about it. I don't think AI is a band-aid that can fix any broken business. I mean, you have to understand your business, you have to understand what business problem you're solving, and then you have to think of AI as an important tool to help you transform and accelerate that business.
I love that. I love that. Business first. We are talking about the business problem to be solved first, and we use AI as a leverage to solve this
Yes.
issue. Yeah.
In fact,
And
whenever we're talking to customers who are thinking about AI, we always try and make sure we anchor it in a business problem. Are you trying to improve customer sat? Are you trying to create a new product area that's going to drive revenue? Are you looking so once you understand what that key business value is, now you understand how and what types of AI you can leverage to really go and attack that. But if you're literally just saying, I'm going to give my customer service reps AI and they're going to go make business, sort of work for me, that doesn't solve a problem. That's just giving someone AI and hoping that it makes them more efficient. But if you really think about it as a business outcome and then work backwards and understanding the piece people, do they have the skills needed to leverage and take advantage of these tools? You understand, your overall process. Is it conducive to leveraging AI and can you do it in a smart and efficient way? And then you also need to understand your general business environment, regulations, requirements, and how can it support and work within those confines. And so I think when you do that, you'll find that there's lots of areas of improvement and efficiency that can be derived. Um, but again, it does take some thought. It just doesn't happen as a result
Yes.
of using a chatbot, for example.
I love that. You said it so well. And I think it's also so important for companies to know that they need to understand what are the business metrics they want, what success means, basically, to be
Absolutely.
able to understand if what they've implemented makes sense or not for them, and get the ROI that is expected behind. But if you don't have a clear vision of what do you want to improve, then you can't monitor it and you can't understand if this is success or
Yes.
not. No?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Given how models are evolving every week, right? When you hear and understand the rate of pace and innovation that the models are able to produce new intelligence, new types of capabilities, um, you really have to stay on top of it because what you implemented last week, may require a different approach next week because there's a new and better or different solution. And so I think that also presents a challenge, but it also presents this incredible opportunity to understand that if you're building solutions and understand that they're only going to get better, AI is the worst that it's ever going to be today
Hmm.
and looking at the pace of innovation and change and improvement, as you start to fast forward and build out a lot of these solutions, it's going to have incredible impact, not just today, but even more so down the road.
Very clear. What are the typical challenges that organizations face when they implement inference at scale? And how does NVIDIA help them to overcome those hurdles?
Yeah. So I would say there's a couple of key challenges. One is how do you do it um, efficiently and dynamically? Because, like I mentioned, inference is a little bit, the workload itself is different than training. Training, you know exactly what you're going to do, you know exactly how much compute you need, what type of model you're doing. But with inference, most people are running multiple models. And so you don't know exactly what the usage is going to be. So you have to have a system and a platform that's fairly dynamic and responsive and flexible. You also may not know exactly which model is going to be popular this week. There might be a new, image generation thing that becomes viral, and all of a sudden everyone wants to use your platform to create images of themselves, next to a shark.
Yes.
Um, but understanding that you need a platform that's very sort of flexible and fungible creates, sort of both a challenge and an opportunity, especially the way we approach working with our customers is when we build our platform, we start at the horizontal layer saying, okay, we want to build the best hardware, networking, computing, and switches that help deliver the performance. But we also invest a ton in a software layer that allow us to create what we call domain-specific libraries, as well as domain-specific AI tools and techniques. We have something called NIMS, which is the NVIDIA Inference Microservices, so that if you're a medical imaging company, you can build a solution that's very targeted and useful for yourself. If you are someone building a image classification system that's looking at video analysis, for example, we have software and toolkits that help you build and optimize for that. So the fact that we're building all these different sort of specialized targeted software solutions helps our customers have the flexibility and fungibility they need to deliver any type of workload that they're going to face, given the dynamic nature of inference. The other key thing that you really want to have to think about from a efficiency standpoint or an overall profitability standpoint is, there's always this tension between understanding what type of user experience can I create versus how many users can I support. And from a business perspective, you want to make sure that you can have a very responsive application, right? You want to make sure that people aren't waiting for their queries to come back, for minutes or hours in some cases, depending on how in depth the actual query is. But more importantly, you want to make sure that you can service, enough users so that it's profitable. And so, we've been very adamant about describing inference as not being any single point on a performance curve. It's really understanding that there's a continuum and having those trade-offs of, both user experience or interactivity and system throughput actually dictates how you want to build your profitability equation for your actual business. And so that's something that we spent a lot of time working on both internally, and we spent a lot of time talking to customers about this trade-off that you had to make sure that when you're going into deploying an infra solution, you understand how many users am I trying to support? What do I want their user experience to be? What
Mhm.
level of intelligence do I need to have in my model so that it gives credible answers? How do I make sure that they're not, the models aren't hallucinating and they're leveraging, what we call retrieval augmented data that's provided by customers. So these are all things that you have to think about when you're deploying inference that makes it a challenge. And that's really what makes it exciting, like I said earlier.
Yeah, it's excellent. And I think a key success factor and a key feature that you're bringing at Nvidia is this capacity to customize it, huh, on all those dimensions that you presented. It's not a one fit for all, and each use case is different. Each environment, clients, business is different, and the capacity to, yeah, making it specifically fit for this for each of them is critical, I guess.
Yeah, and that's the power of our software platform. I mean, again, we're known as a hardware company, and that's certainly where we've invested and have tons of innovation and has moved the industry forward. But our software solutions are really what drive sort of the flexibility and utility of our platform. And so, like when I describe some of the solutions that we create, we have something called our Nemo platform, which is specifically about helping enterprises, helping end users take models and post-train them, customize them, and leverage AI for themselves. And so that whole process is something where we've been very sort of actively engaged in. And our solution area, like I mentioned, the Nemo platform is incredibly valuable. But again, oftentimes, you know, every customer is going to have a different objective that they're trying to solve for. So having the platform that can either give them a fully integrated solution or just a hardware-based solution, or somewhere in the middle is really where we really pride ourselves in, knowing that every customer will have a different need and objective. And so, like you said, one size doesn't fit all, even though we offer all the different options for folks to go ahead and use and try out.
That's very clear, Dion. We often hear about a big issue in AI inference is it's about the cost.
Hmm.
What do you think about this, and how at Nvidia can you drive down this cost so that it's
Yeah,
acceptable for most businesses?
this is a good question because this is kind of a counterintuitive answer. So I'll try to break this one down because the answer I give may not resonate, initially, but hopefully it'll make sense as I kind of explain it a bit more. Unlike most industries or even sort of business models, if you want to reduce costs, you look at your input costs and you say, how can I reduce them? How can I cut down my costs as much as possible? And that will in turn lead to a lower cost structure. That is largely true. However, in an AI factory where your revenue is your biggest lever, in other words, your ability to drive more productivity and more efficiency will certainly translate into more value than looking at cost reduction strategies. So what we find, in fact, there was a recent study, a recent benchmark published called Inference Max, and it looked at sort of performance across a number of different models. So it looked at DeepSeek R1, GPT-OSS, and Llama. And forgive the technical terms, but those are some open source AI models that are used. And what it demonstrated is that our NVIDIA platform had, by far the best performance, particularly for a lot of the more advanced reasoning models. And the reason why that's important is we have the best performance, but we're not always the cheapest platform out there. I mean, we're not sort of we understand that there's a lot of opportunity to create and deliver value, and therefore we reflect that in our pricing. But the one thing I would say is when you do the analysis, you can see that a $5 million investment in our GB200 NVL72 platform can translate into $75 million in token revenue. Now, when you think about that ROI, that 15x number is kind of eye-popping. But when you compare it to the alternative, and many of the alternatives that were measured in the benchmarks, we basically delivered over 15 to 17 times more performance. And that translates into real tokens. And so what that means is we were actually able to drive down the cost per token by 10x. And so when you think about your business model of serving and delivering tokens, the way that you reduce the cost is actually by driving the productivity of the assets, delivering more throughput, either throughput per watt or throughput per dollar, but that will
Mhm.
essentially translate into lower cost per token. And that means you can then drive AI and usage across a much wider range of users and a wider range of applications.
That's so clear. Thank you, Dion. That's very clear. My last question for you, very practical. I'm C-level now, watching us now, and I'm thinking, oh, I need this type of platform to help me in my AI production environment. Uh, what are the steps I need to take
Yes.
to use Inference?
Well, like I said, first step is, figure out the business problem that you're trying to tackle and solve, right? And I think first, a keen understanding of your business is really important when you're trying to deploy and leverage AI to go in and solve that problem. Once you've done that, you have to figure out sort of how do you want to approach it. In some cases, it's, you're creating a small prototype or POC where you're trying to understand how and where the solution can add value. And so that's one approach where you might just go and rent a cloud instance and try out some particular solutions. In other cases, you may say, "Hey, we have infrastructure, or we want to start investing in building our own infrastructure, and this is where I can start deploying and leveraging some of these solutions." But I think the key thing is you just have to get started. Understand the business problem, and then start prototyping, start understanding how and where you can reshape your processes, you can reshape your sort of policies and your organization in some cases to fully take advantage of it. And I think through doing that, you'll fail fast, like you'll understand where and when it adds value. You'll be able to understand specifically how your business responds, how your customers respond, how your partners and ecosystem respond to updated processes. And then from there, you roll it out at scale. And once you're in the roll it out at scale process, that's where you're now thinking about how do I deploy and leverage, AI to produce an AI factory. And that's where, again, you're going to look at different options. You might say, do I want to rent? Do I want to actually deploy this in the cloud? Or you might think about how do I build out an AI factory for myself? This is going to be core to my business. This is going to add value and drive real differentiated, sort of competitive positioning or, time to market. And then you would think about how you would build and deploy that solution. And of course, that's where you really have to think about more holistically how it fits into your digital strategy because every large company has a data center footprint of some sort. And so that's where you start to figure out how does this fit into your overall digital strategy of deploying and using AI at scale.
Excellent. And to make it very, very, very pragmatic, do people need to call you, Dion, to implement, or how can they find the information that they need if they want to create an AI factory or if they just want to use inference as part of their environment?
Yeah, yeah. So I would say there's a couple of things. First is, like I said, once you have a good understanding of the business objectives and the problems, then you can reach out to, Nvidia. We have tons of incredibly talented solution architects, folks who can engage and work with you and help you understand what exists, what types of AI techniques and technologies are there to help solve some of those business problems. There's obviously lots of our partners, folks like, Accenture, McKinsey, et cetera, who build consulting practices, who we work with and educate of how our solutions integrate and within their overall business processes to help them, provide some recommendations to customers. And that's another way that we engage to make sure that, folks who are new to this and trying to understand how they can implement AI can kind of have a helping hand along the way.
Yes, thank you, Dion. That was really great, very very insightful and engaging as well as a discussion and great illustrations. You made it very lively and concrete. Thank you for that. Uh,
Well, No, I was just gonna say
Thank
no.
you, Diane.
It's an exciting topic. There's lots of exciting work
Yes.
happening, and I appreciate you for making it a very very fun and engaging discussion too.
Thank you, Dion. And thanks to all of you for watching us. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks a lot.